Yeah, good morning and just welcome everyone. I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy. I want to appreciate all of you for joining the call for this virtual press conference. As you know, Bethune-Cookman University has tenured its resignation from the conference effective June 30th, 2021. Bethune-Cookman has been a great partner in the conference, and we certainly wish them well. This is an unusual situation and unusual year for the conference, apart from the COVID pandemic. We now have 3 members who will be leaving the conference, including North Carolina A&T and Florida A&M University, all of whom have been excellent partners for us as well. Beginning with the 2021 to 22 year, the conference footprint will be the same as it was back in 1970 when we first started. The institutions in terms of locations, the furthest south will be South Carolina State in Orangeburg, and the furthest north will continue to be Delaware State in Dover, Delaware. One of the things that we are looking at and that we clearly are back to now is looking at the geographic location. We think that that has played a factor in terms of the Florida teams, travel schedules, how often students are missing class as well. So we've actually engaged a consulting firm to assist the MEAC with conference expansion, which certainly would not be limited to HBCUs alone. About 9 months ago, we set up a search committee of the CEOs of the MEAC, which essentially are the chancellors and the presidents, a small group to look at the possibility of adding schools and also assessing the conference. And that has led to the decision to bring in a consultant as well to assist with that process. So I want to continue to emphasize that we have a viable Division I conference with outstanding academic institutions. And with that in mind, I'll turn it over to you to answer your questions of either the commissioner or myself.
Once again, if you have a question, I'm asking that you utilize the chat window. I'll identify you and then you identify yourself and your affiliation. You can ask your question at this time. So are there any questions?
Thank you. This is Dr. Ville for Dr. Ville's Inside the HBCU Sports Lab. This question is for President Frederick as well as Commissioner Thomas, and that is Dr. Frederick and Dr. Thomas. In regards to the consultants and the CEO committee, is there a framework that you have created in regards to the expansion process that you spoke about? Obviously see that the conference is certainly viable with the institutions that are left to continue to have the Division I NCAA certification for postseason participation. But in terms of expansion is my question. Yeah. What does that process look like, and are you able to provide any type of information on the timeline that may take?
Sure. I'll take a first shot and then turn over to the commissioner. The directions that we've given to the consulting firm is to first assess the conference in terms of the schools that are left. First, to look at the athletic programs, the different sports we have. We're not looking to just fulfill the minimum requirements for Division I, but we obviously are looking for areas in which we can grow. An example of that is, for instance, golf, how many teams we have, and the sports that we have where we could get into conference play, postseason conference play at the very end and have championships. So we are looking at first assessing the conference, and that's going to take place with the consulting firm engaging with each of the universities, the chancellors and the presidents. And then the second aspect of what we're going to do on a parallel basis is to look at potential opportunities to add institutions to the conference. Obviously, geographics is one of the things that we're concerned about. And then second, going to be academic institutions that are also kin to where we are as well as we move forward. Commissioner, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
No, I think you have touched all the salient points, Dr. Frederick, in terms of what the conference is doing.
And timeline is, we're certainly moving with some urgency. We expect the first aspect of this to be done by mid-July, and then the second aspect, obviously, in terms of specific institutions, et cetera, will be dependent on, what's available. Obviously, we're also in a, pandemic situation with different types of phases, depending on where institutions may be located, which may be a challenge around actually conducting visits, et cetera. We'll do most of what we can virtually, but to get a sense of campuses and people, we will, rather probably have some in-person meetings, but we are going to continue moving forward with that.
Thank you, President Frederick, and thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah, thanks for your question. Appreciate it.
Our next question comes from Mr. Jay Walker.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning. You all hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So my question, two questions. One, I know before we talked about expansion, how it's not really attractive financially to expand if you've got questions because of the fee from the NCAA, gone from, I don't know, $25,000 to over $1 million to look at a Division II program. Has there been any consideration about possibly asking the NCAA for a waiver on that money? Because I'm under the assumption the money would go. It's not viable for HBCUs to dole out that type of money. So wondering if that's part of the process. With the two Florida schools leaving, and a lot of that I believe has to do with geography, does that make it a conversation available to the institutions that have already left the conference to possibly come back?
Yeah, so again, I'll jump in. You're going a little bit in and out, Jay, so I'm just going to repeat your questions so that everybody knows your questions. The first question was whether or not our fee, as we add or as schools try to move from Division II to Division I, the fee that we have, if that's an onerous issue, and if there's an opportunity for us to get a waiver from NCAA. And then the second question was, with the Florida schools and geography being an issue, if we are able to do something like that, would their coming back to the conference be something for consideration? I hope I captured both of your questions appropriately. On the first one, we have not looked into whether or not we should be trying to get a waiver. And I don't want to speak for the entire conference. I can tell you how it is an institution. I do feel strongly that if we're going to participate at this level, we have to recruit schools and institutions that are going to be able to make the financial commitment, and that's one of them in terms of having to pay those types of fees, and we have to have a viable conference around what we do in order to make that. So even getting a waiver really just takes care of one financial aspect, but for long-term sustainability, I don't think that that's necessarily a road. And so your part B of your question with respect to the Florida schools, the reality is, especially when you look at college athletics today and we look at the cost, it's not just a cost in terms of dollars for the travel, but it's also in terms of time, taking athletes out of classes for prolonged travel, et cetera. Especially if you're not flying, you go from Florida to DC and back, you have athletes in some circumstances missing up to 4 days of class, depending on when games are scheduled. So it still is something that's going to be an issue. And then we have to be cognizant of the fact that schools like Florida A&M are also answering to state legislators as well. And so that's a factor as well, apart from just the fan base.
If I can try to clarify, my question was, assuming the Florida schools are leaving and they had geography. We've had A&T left recently, Hampton left recently. Without those two Florida schools there, would there be a consideration to maybe try and make the MEAC become attractive again to them because they no longer have to worry about the time out of class, which one of the schools listed?
Sure, and I'll take that. I probably saw that as a separate part, so I apologize, but I'll take that as well. If you go back and you look at the history of the MEAC since 1970, we've had schools go and come again based on some of these circumstances as well. I don't want to speculate around what that may look like. I think what we have a responsibility to do is to make sure that the conference is very strong, that the conference is thriving, that we're very competitive. And I think if we do those things that we need to do to ensure that, including the types of institutions we add, I think some of what has happened in the past could potentially happen. It may involve those schools that you mentioned, but it may involve other schools that previously had an association, with the MEAC. But I think the key is for us internally to make sure that we're taking care of what we need to take care of to make sure it's a viable conference where student athletes are graduating and where it's extremely competitive as well. I hope that does answer your question.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jay. Our next question comes from Rory Shamrock.
Sharrock. Good morning. Commissioner Thomas, your thoughts on with the departures just this year alone of A&T, FAMU, and Bethune-Cookman. Those some elite programs that have won multiple championships across different sports. And a two-part question, and it's also been the top trending subject on social media. So from a competitive standpoint, your thoughts on losing three programs like A&T, FAMU, and Bethune, and then from a marketing and brand awareness standpoint with this light being shed on the MEAC with those schools leaving?
Well, Roy, first and foremost, I would agree with Dr. Frederick and his assessment. Obviously, we are in unprecedented times regarding the COVID-19, and then we lose three members notification this year. But I think we can't lose sight of the remaining institutions. Remaining institutions are tremendous academic institutions. They are classified as Carnegie Foundation Research 2 institutions, high research intensity. They've also won championships as well within our conference. So just to say that FAMU and A&T and Bethune-Cookman leaving the conference doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have other high-profile institutions remaining. And so I happen to think, and obviously I have a bias here, that the remaining institutions are high-profile as well, and have won championships in our conference as well. So I would like to think that we will solidify our standing with the remaining members. So I have no doubt in our minds that the MEAC will continue to sustain itself, but also get better as a conference. Simply because now it's interesting how history kind of repeats itself at times. We have 6 remaining founding members of our conference. A&T is the one that will be leaving, but that footprint was from South Carolina State, all the way to Dover, Delaware. And so that original footprint that the founders originally established, we're back to that now. And so I just think that now we will be able to look at it more strategically in terms of what fits for our conference, academically, athletically, geographically. So I feel good about where we are, and that's not to say that losing FAMU, A&T, and Bethune-Cookman is not disappointing. So, but I do believe in the rest of our members being able to continue to excel.
Okay, I guess it's my turn to go next. Dr. Frederick, Dr. Thomas, I appreciate you guys for having this, letting us get a chance to talk to you all face to face as much as you can these days. Question, with the Celebration Bowl coming up on its last year, MEAC and the SWAC both being the 2 conferences involved with that, as you guys are trying to find your way and add more football, are you concerned about the number of current schools that you have, as far as if that will affect your Celebration Bowl status going forward? How big of a concern is that with one conference having 12 football teams in a couple of years and one team conference having 6?
Well, first and foremost, we've been in contact with ESPN regarding the Celebration Bowl, and the champion will go. So you're going to have one team participating, a champion, and the other team, the MEAC, our champion will participate. Obviously, one team has 12 football playing institutions, but their best team will participate. And the MEAC best team will participate. So I foresee the MEAC continue to be successful in the Celebration Bowl. By the way, we played 5 Celebration Bowls now, and the MEAC leads 4-1. Now, obviously, A&T has had 4 victories, but we have other programs that are very good as well. Over time, we've had success in those programs from top to bottom in the remaining 6 football playing institutions. Yes, this is the last year of the contract, and we've been in contact with ESPN. ESPN wants to renew the contract for the Celebration Bowl. That is a tremendous branding asset for us, a tremendous financial asset for us. So we are looking forward to extending the Celebration Bowl.
Sorry, our next question comes from David Steele.
Good morning, Dr. Frederick and Dr. Thomas. Excuse me if this may already be common knowledge, and this is kind of a 2-part question. One, what is the consulting firm, and how did the conference end up choosing it? And the second part of the question is, seeing that you're that you're right now looking to expand, where do you feel you are in terms of being absolutely certain that the schools you have are going to continue in the MEAC? And I ask that because I wonder how aggressive other conferences may be to try to come and get some of the current members the way they did not just the SWAC, but obviously the Big South, and maybe possibly some other predominantly white conferences.
I'll let Dr. Frederick talk about the consultants and start off the conversation regarding expansion as well.
Yeah, we've contracted with Collegiate Sports. We had a process where we looked at, we contacted a few firms, and then we narrowed it down to a couple, interviewed them, had the entire committee of the CEOs of the conference interview them, and then made a decision on them based on their track record, what we thought that they'll be able to do in terms of capability, etc. With respect to, I'll take your question probably kind of 2 parts in terms of stability and obviously others being able to come in. Certainly, once Hampton left, we were concerned about being approached, and I think there's several schools in the conference that have been approached before. That's always going to be a possibility. The schools that remain, I'm sure that they're going to be contacted. I think we have a responsibility to make our case about the conference and about the commitment. Howard is a founding member, and so we've been committed to the conference, and we're going to continue to have ongoing conversations with the others about the situation with the conference and what our intentions are. I think what we have to do is to make sure that we provide a compelling case, not just for why folks should stay, not just for the sake of staying, but why competing in the MEAC is good for these institutions as well. And tradition and legacy certainly is a part of that, but like everything else in the HBCU world, I think we also have to be realistic about the marketplace around college athletics, and therefore we have to take measures to ensure that we can do that. The geography is a factor, and it leads to financial issues and decisions as well. And so we have to make sure that we look at those types of things, that we have the right types of sponsorship, the right types of support systems, et cetera. And so we are having some open conversations with all of the presidents and chancellors as well. Next week, we'll have a meeting with all of the presidents and chancellors and their board chairs as well, so that we can, have a fairly open conversation about those other possibilities.
I would like to make a comment as well. I think that we have to realize that we all talk about the elite programs that are leaving the MEAC. Well, we have some elite programs that are remaining. But you have to understand, so where did that elite program get to be elite from? They got to be elite in the MEAC. And other conferences have seen that, and they want to come in and obviously ask our institutions, are they interested in joining their conference? But the facts of the matter still remains, those institutions, quote unquote, as you all indicated, elite programs in the MEAC, got to be elite in the MEAC. So let's not lose fact of that. And so we think that we have stability in terms of our revenue distribution. We are only the FCS program who actually have had 18 consecutive years of revenue distribution at the end of the fiscal year, which is June 30th. 18 consecutive revenue distribution to our member institutions that no other conference has been able to match. So I just want you to know that there are tremendous assets within the MEAC. So now we are in a compact, regionalized conference now, beginning in 21-22, and we'll see what the future holds for us. But I don't want you all to lose sight, the media to lose sight of programs that gain their elite and greatness in the MEAC. And so for whatever reason that they deem appropriate for their institution, they decided to move on. So that's the landscape in which we live in intercollegiate athletics today.
I think I'm next, according to Maurice. Thank you, Maurice. Thank you, Dr. Frederick and Dr. Thomas. This is Luke Williams from the Black College Sports page. And Commissioner, first Commissioner, we talked a week or so ago, and you talked about what was required to maintain Division I status. And actually, before this call, I actually queried the NCAA to try to get some clarification about those bylaws that govern Division I status. And the series that they sent me of bylaws talked about things that you mentioned, how many teams and how long they had to have been playing certain sports. As you know, this week has been, the last 2 weeks or so, been filled with a lot of rumors about what FAMU was going to do. Some of them that were confirmed and obviously has been true. There are rumors even now about that Delaware State is looking to move. And what that brings up for me, and the question I have for you is, from that standpoint of Division I status and maintaining Division I status, how many of the current schools can you afford to lose before your Division I status is called into question? That's number one. And number two is are you familiar with anything about Delaware State or about what they may be considering in terms of perhaps also making a decision before the July 1st deadline to move?
Well, I'll flip that. Let's talk about Delaware State, which is a fine institution and has a tremendous history academically and athletically. Dr. Allen is new president there, Tony Allen, and he has conversed with me as recently as this week in terms of its commitment to the MEAC moving forward. And so that's the situation with Delaware State. Now, Luke, you know as well as I do, there's always going to be rumors and what people think they might do. The social media is not an engine of
truth and veracity. Of truth,
accuracy, in terms of what's going on in the world, not just athletics. So there are probably going to be some other rumors out there about other institutions as well. So that's just the way the social media is these days. In reference to the maintaining our Division I status, Division I status, we can have 7 institutions that's been together for a minimum consecutive 8 years. And you can remain your Division I status if you have a men and women's basketball program, and you have to have another team sport on the men's side, and you have to have another team sport on the women's side, be that softball, be that women's volleyball, on the men's side, be that baseball, be it football. Now, we cannot afford to lose another football playing institution, simply because then we will fall below the minimum requirement for football.
Okay.
For football.
Gotcha.
We still can maintain our Division I status for men's basketball.
Okay, I see. Okay. So having 7 after this year with FAM, A&T, and Bethune leaving, having 7, you're safe in terms of football. And if for example, and I don't want to ask hypothetical, but if you were to lose another one, does the NCAA give you some time to try to correct that, or would you immediately fall out of Division I status?
For instance, the NCAA will give you a 2-year grace period.
Okay.
A 2-year grace period to bring another member in to get you back whole for the Division I status.
Okay.
And so that's the way that works.
I got you.
So it's not like you just cut off immediately as Division I status. No, you have a 2-year period to go out and bring in another member that will solidify your Division I status with NCAA.
Thank you very much for those answers.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Next up, we have Mr. Charlie Neal.
Good morning, Dr. Frederick, Dr. Thomas. The question, when you talked about the search committee that you have, when you look at some of these schools, there may be schools that want to come in just as a football playing program in your conference. Would you consider those type of schools if they didn't bring their whole athletic program into the conference?
Yes, we will. As you know, they're called associate members.
Yes.
And other FCS conferences have associate members in football. Those conferences are the Colonial Athletic Association Conference, CAA, the Big South Conference, and other conferences as well have associate members in football. The MEAC, we have associate members as well. Women's bowling, we have associate member with the University of Alabama, Birmingham as associate member. We have Mama as associate member in women's bowling as well. And we have Augustus University, that's men's golf, that's associate member. And so, yes, I would think that the Council of Presidents and Chancellors would consider that. Dr. Frederick could address that.
Yeah, we absolutely will consider that. Our review is going to be a comprehensive one. And while obviously football, basketball get a lot of attention, we're going to look at every sport that everyone plays, because I think ultimately as well, we have to look at overall resources for all the student athletes and make sure that competitiveness and those types of things can be maintained. So we're going to look at all those options as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Our next question comes from Mr. Donald Ware. Donald, are you there?
Okay, I'm here. I appreciate it, Maurice. Donald Ware with Boxer Row. Dr. Thomas, Dr. Frederick, thank you for doing this. A couple of questions. One, shortly after A&T announced that it was going to leave the conference, the MEAC office put out a statement that said the remaining schools were united, but now in the last couple of weeks, you've had both FAMU and Bethune-Cookman leave. What happened within that time frame? I mean, were indeed the schools united with respect to that? Because now you have had two other schools to leave. The next question would also be, have you, and I don't know if this was talked about before I came on, have you reached out to, CIAA schools to try to get, to see their interest in joining the MEAC? Thank you.
Yeah, so the schools were united. I mean, all the presidents and chancellors stated at that time that they were committed, but we all recognize that they have boards that they have to answer to, they have fan bases that they've got to answer to. And as these things evolve, as any of us would imagine, I'm sure the questions will be asked, as well as pressure will be brought to bear around those issues. And the complexity of that decision making is not lost on us. And especially when we start discussing the finances, the era that we all are going to be in post-COVID is going to be a very complicated one, especially for HBCUs. Our communities have been disproportionately impacted as well. And if you look at kind of the timeline of when some of these things have transpired as well, and as we think of even reopening our campuses, the financial constraints are only going to grow. And so I think as people look at athletics and you look at the financing of athletic programs in the bigger scheme of things for universities, there's going to be continued pressure. The universities that are left are also committed at present time. But as I said, I mean, some of this is going to evolve, and that's why I think we need to have a comprehensive review of what we're doing, who's involved, what's, the capabilities, and just have a very frank, honest assessment of that and move forward based on that, frank and honest assessment.
Okay, and then have you reached out to any of the CIAA schools?
And no, we have not reached out yet. Like I said, we have a process involving the consultant, and we're going to let the consultant lead. We are trying to discourage, anybody from reaching out on their own. So we are going to allow them to lead that process for us.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Donald. Joey Lamar.
Hi, I want to thank you guys for doing this. I'm with WCTV. I have two questions. My first one is to the commissioner. What were your conversations like with FAMU Athletic Director Courtney Gaucher as FAMU was getting ready to leave the MEAC? And the second one is with having 7 football members now, does that change the distribution, the revenue distribution model, or the revenue distribution expectations for those schools? And have you looked at possibly changing the revenue distribution model that the MEAC currently has set up?
Joy, that is Joy, right?
Yes.
Okay. Obviously, the institutions by bylaws and constitutions have to notify the conference in terms of their resignation from the conference by July 1. My conversation with Courtney Gaucher was, and Dr. Robertson, president of Florida A&M, was to alert the conference that they would be resigning from the conference. And our process, our bylaws clearly stipulate that we have to receive that information in writing. And we have received that information in writing from Florida A&M, and we will begin the exit process for Florida A&M and institutions that have stated their resignation from the conference. So that's the answer to your question regarding our conversation with FAMU. Our revenue distribution, we have a formula for our revenue distribution. Obviously, the more institutions you have, the revenue distribution for institution will be adjusted to reflect the formula. And most of the time, it's the more institutions you have, unless you have significantly more revenue, then each institution's revenue will decrease. So when you lose institutions, our revenue streams are consistent, and so it will increase the financial distribution for the remaining members of our conference. When we hopefully admit others to the conference, then hopefully the revenue will increase as well. So we've had a revenue, and conservatively speaking, during my 18 years as commissioner, we have distributed over $35 million back to our member institutions. So we have a formula until the CEOs, presidents, chancellors change that formula. Then we feel comfortable with the revenue distribution continuing for our membership.
Okay, and just a quick follow-up: is the primary driving sport to that revenue model, is that football or is that men's basketball?
Well, it's a combination of both, and it's a combination of corporate partnerships as well. So it's the ESPN, it's the Nikes, it's the Celebration Bowl, it's the MEAC Swag Challenge. It's an array of revenue streams that we've been able to implement during the 18 years I've been commissioner. And so we're very pleased with the kind of revenue that we've been able to generate as a conference.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have David Hall.
Thanks, Maurice. Hey, everybody. Dr. Thomas, really quick, and forgive me if I missed this, but is there an ideal number of teams the conference would like to add, or is there a cap? At what point do you, when you get X amount of team or X amount of school members, when do you stop?
David, good to see you. It's been a while since I've been able to speak with you. Mm-hmm. First and foremost, I don't want you all to lose sight of the conference has been expanding for quite some time. The conference brought Hampton University in 1995. It brought Norfolk State in 1997. It brought Winston-Salem State in 2007. Then they went back to Division II. We brought North Carolina Central in 2010. And Savannah State, we brought them in 2010 as well. So we were as high as 13 members. And to specifically answer your question, our strategic plan was to have 12 football playing institutions. So we could go into divisional play from that standpoint. So we would like to continue to add football playing members and non-football playing members to get us to that 12, 13 number, so we can hopefully go into divisional play and still gain control over the travel expenses and miss student athlete travel time, miss class time rather.
One other quick one. Are there, you may not be able to mention specifics, but are there specific institutions you guys are targeting based on geography?
David, Dr. Frederick addressed that question early on.
Oh, okay.
In terms of the consultants, we've hired a consultant.
Yeah.
Consultant will take the lead in that process.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. We have Stephen Gaither.
Hey, yeah, appreciate it. Came back with another question. So you guys say that the consultants are going to take the lead, but obviously at the end of the day, it's the MEAC and you guys are in control. Ideally, would you, you talked about how succinct the footprint is now back to Delaware, to Orangeburg, South Carolina. Ideally, depending on what the consultants give you, would you guys be looking to pretty much restricting yourself to that footprint? And is that, and what are the main selling points, second part, that you guys would have for another conference as you guys add them to would like to get them to add them to the MEAC?
I'll let Dr. Frederick address that question.
Yeah, I think there are a few things. I mean, geography is one. The other thing that we have to look at is academics in terms of the match. Obviously, when we look at recruiting students as well, student athletes as well as other students, you want to look at the student bodies as well to see, kind of what makes sense, any potential opportunities for rivalries and games of homecomings in the HBCU world, as you know, are quite festive. So assessing, some of those activities as well. And then, as I said before, the breadth of the sports that are being played. Right now, when we look at, for instance, golf, I think there's an opportunity, around where we are in golf in terms of seeing if other schools can bring that in. We are the outlier in the HBCU world with, swimming and diving team at Howard. So that wouldn't be a primary sport, for instance, that would actually shift a whole lot of decision making, just to give you the flip side of the coin. So I think those are some of the primary things we're looking at as we assess the potential schools.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. We have Roy Evans.
Evans, yes, it is. Good morning, Dr. Frederick and Dr. Thomas. Understand that I have two questions, and I'm thinking that maybe the first one had been addressed or something, and I know you guys said you're going to let the consultants handle a lot of this. But now that FAMU and Bethune-Cookman have been pulled out of your footprint, and it consists and brings you to that definitely Mideastern, Northeastern type area, has there been any conversation about re-engaging both Hampton and North Carolina A&T into coming back, as well as we start to move?
If somebody could mute their phone, it would be helpful. And I'll let Dr. Frederick address that question.
All right, so that question was asked before, regarding whether bringing the other schools back would be the case. And as I said before, I think our primary responsibility is to make sure that we do what's necessary to ensure that the conference is competitive, that the schools feel that there's something significant to gain. And the history of the conference over the past 50 years is that we've had schools come and go. And I think that we will be in that circumstance as well. The dynamics right now in terms of overall status of HBCUs as well is going to be significantly affected by the pandemic, the economic circumstance right now as well. And so that obviously is a down the road issue. I don't think it's a short-term issue. And based on the conference rules, I'm sure there are conference rules for the Big South and the SWAC as well that those schools will have to abide by in terms of notification of, you know, when they would leave, et cetera. And I think that that's something that we have to look at as well.
The follow-up question that I did have to that, with the economics of FCS football, that includes, of course, the MEAC and the SWAC, it is clear that the HBCU conferences have a stronger footprint and profit margin opportunity than any of these other conferences. Is that something that you guys have, in pulling the consultants together, talked about to them as a strength to talk about? Because we know that the MEAC and the HBCU product is one that is well above most other FCS programs as far as attendance.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of several things that we've been talking about around that. You know, I think, again, when you look at HBCUs and college athletics, you look at some of the dynamics that are taking place in the country, even with respect to the civil unrest. I think there's a lot that's going to happen over the next 12 to 18 months, both good and bad, in our favor. And I think those are some of the things that I think the consultants need to react to and assess. You now have African-American unemployment approaching 17%, which is probably even higher than 20%. So if you think about 1 in 5 working African-Americans being out of a job, that ability for students to then attend our HBCUs could be compromised. So that's a factor on the downside as well. So yes, the consultant will look at the FCS and the profit margin, and that's an upside issue that we certainly would need to try to maximize and improve. But I think that there are also other factors that we have to look at. And so when people make decisions around geography and travel and those things, they're not to be taken lightly. They also, you know, they are coming from a circumstance where there's a lot of thought, you know, that's going into this, and also a lot of pressure that's surrounding, you know, kind of these decisions as well. And it is not, no athletic program at any of our universities exists in isolation. We have a much larger footprint that we also are speaking to as well. We want them to work in a complementary fashion, but we recognize that there are lots of prevailing forces that we also got to pay attention to. So that, and that's why, and just to be clear, since this has come up a couple of times, the point about having the consultant handle this is because the data analytics, the evaluation of each of the schools, all of those prevailing factors needs to be done in a very detailed and professional fashion. And that's what we're hiring the consultant to do, so that when we do sit around the table to make a decision about adding schools, et cetera, we're taking those things into consideration, all of those factors.
Thank you.
Right. Our next question comes from Michael Croker.
Yes, from HBCU Baseball, Black College Nines. Hello to everyone. My question is a two-part question. Will the landscape change with the 5 remaining baseball programs for NCAA Division I season regional play, considering they take the conference champion? How will that play out with just the 5 remaining teams?
The 5 remaining teams, according to the NCAA, after the 2021 season, Michael, the MEAC will have 2 years to add a 6th team. So, but we still will maintain our AQ. So after the 2021 season, we will have our AQ for 21-22, 22-23. And that will give us time to add another institution or another baseball team as an associate member. So we will maintain our AQ for baseball until through the 2023 baseball season.
Okay, I think you answered my second question as well. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go down. Next question is from Roy Shamrock.
Rory Shamrock. Good morning again, Dr. Thomas and everyone. Dr. Thomas, wanted to get your thoughts. Obviously, there's two sides to the argument regarding championship games. You alluded to it earlier about divisional play. Do you think that the lack of a championship game for football in the MEAC played a decision in the schools leaving this year and from in the past, like with Hampton leaving a couple of years ago?
Well, Roy, the institutions that are leaving indicated that one of the salient points were travel expenses and missed student athlete class time. Mm-hmm. So that's what they publicly stated as to the reasons, some of the reasons why they left. If I'm not mistaken, I don't think that one of those reasons was about we didn't have a championship game for our conference. As you know, we had an AQ for the playoffs before we decided to go to the Celebration Bowl format with our champion. But our other institutions still were eligible for postseason play as an at-large team if their record and strength of schedule and all that came into play to be selected. But I don't know if that was a factor into decisions being made by the institutions that are leaving. From my observation in speaking with those institutions, not having a championship game in football never came into our discussions.
Thank you.
Right, our next question comes from Jeff Mills.
Hey, it's Jeff Mills with the Greensboro News and Record. Just wanted to ask, the MEAC's identity has always been as an HBCU league. With this climate and with your consulting firm, as you look forward to expanding and adding teams, would you consider PWIs for membership?
Dr. Frederick indicated in his opening statement that we would be looking at PWIs as well. If Dr. Frederick would like to continue to elaborate on that, obviously he can do so.
Yeah, you know, I think our first obligation is going to be to evaluate what makes a conference better. I think is the first thing that we have to look at, and we also have to look at match as well. You know, what's appropriate for our footprint and what matches what we're trying to do. I think in your question you alluded to the current climate, and I would assume that current climate you're referring to is the national civil unrest around systemic racism and those types of things. I think that's a broader issue. It's not just about athletics. It can change the paradigm in athletics if there was a different approach to some of those systems in the country and what we do in terms of supporting our HBCUs. People don't write about this often, but the reality is athletes, for instance, at Howard we graduate 80% of our athletes. We talk a lot about where Black athletes go to play sports, but I'll tell you, I mean, the athletes who come here, going to med school and law school after they leave us. And I think that unfortunately that doesn't get as much press coverage as whether or not the 1% of athletes make it to the program. And again, I think that's a bigger issue. It's a systemic issue that requires a change in the paradigm of how we think about what success is in athletics. And, I want the athletes who come into the MEAC to win, to be competitive, to be the best. If they get a chance to play in the pros, I also am very supportive of that. But as educational institutions, we shouldn't be seen as pass-throughs. And I think that we should also celebrate the fact that our graduation rates, are something that we should also tout as well, and make sure that it's one of the litmus tests for our success in the long term. So yes, we have a very unusual situation in the country now, but it has a lot of structural issues that come with it that go quite deep into the fabric of our society, and something that we're going to have to continue to address going forward.
Jeff, I just want to follow up with Dr. Frederick's comments. Jeff, we have been looking at PWIs for quite some time in terms of the compatibility for our conference. And so I will not diverge those institutions, obviously, but we have talked with several institutions, PWIs, and within our footprint about possible membership. It just did not work out to our advantage. But I've been commissioner 18 years now, and every year we observe the landscape, and PWIs has always been part of that process. So I just wanted to alert you that just not recently that were we considering PWI. We've always, since I've been commissioner, considered PWI.
Thanks, Jeff. Next question comes from the line of Dr. Clavell.
Yes, thanks, Maurice. This question is for either or both Dr. President Frederick and Commissioner Thomas. It's a question of clarification, if you would, from an edification framework. About 10, 15 years ago, there were several institutions that were moving from the NCAA Division II classification to NCAA Division I. And a lot of them were looking at more of the basketball side. But the reason I use that historical nature is there were reports from several media papers out there that the NCAA was looking at making the demarcation for moving from or moving to Division I classification of $1 million. And that's kind of stuck out there. Could you provide any clarification on whether that was actually passed by the NCAA legislation? And I asked that to understand, whether that $1 million is the actuality, or was that something that just kind of stuck in the ether, as you talked about earlier, Commissioner Thomas, about some of the things that on social media that are not necessarily accurate. Can you provide clarification on that one way or the other?
Yes, I can. I think Luke Williams mentioned that. But and I want to be very clear, the application fee, it might have been Jay that mentioned it, but anyway, the application fee for moving to Division II or reclassifying from Division II to Division I is almost $1.6 million. And the NCAA and the membership came up with that figure in terms of the kind of value that institution reclassifying from Division II to Division I, financial value would amount to that within the first couple of years of being eligible for the financial distribution from the NCAA. So the formula that they used to come up with that was several years ago. When those of you that have been around the block a little while know that I was a director of athletics, and I was the director when we transitioned from Division II to Division I. At that time, in 1994, the application fee was $15,000. So there was a preponderance of reclassification from Division II to Division I. And so the NCAA, whether it was stated or not, it's pretty much implicit that they had to find a way to assign a larger financial commitment from institution wanting to reclassify from Division II to Division I.
Thank you for that clarification.
All right.
Maurice, I believe that Mr. Clayton has been trying to get a question in here.
Yeah, I have him on the list.
All right, say.
I have Ty Miller and then Mr. Clayton. So it's Ty Miller first.
Good morning, Dr. Thomas and Dr. Frederick. Ty Miller with the Power News Radio Network. I got a question for either one of you. First of all, what's been the reaction of other conference presidents, football coaches, and or players you've had conversations with?
So we've been meeting regularly. Obviously, there's significant concern about the departures. The presidents, in particular, are trying to assess kind of where things are, their own boards and their own fan base. Trying to make sure that we can be responsive to them, not only to be reassuring, but to also make sure that we're clear in terms of articulating what the way forward is. I have not spoken to a lot of athletes, just a couple. They haven't expressed as much concern. I have spoken to my AD, and I'm sure he's been in touch. We have a new coach, obviously, that he's been in touch with, and the other coaches. I'm planning to have a call with all of my coaches and my AD so that I could update them, directly on my thoughts, as well as get their feedback as well. So I think that there's appropriate anxiety. You don't lose 4 members over a couple of years and it doesn't cause some concern. We understand the issues that have led to that, and we also need to reassure everyone that we're taking steps in order to mitigate that and in order to strengthen the conference as well.
Dr. Thomas, in the midst of what's going on, COVID-19 and social unrest, what's the biggest challenge in stabilizing the fan base and regrowing the MEAC?
Well, that's Ty, right?
Yes.
Okay, good to hear from you, Ty.
Nice to be here.
Obviously, we have to continue to engage our fan base, our alumni, to ensure that they understand that the MEAC will be viable moving into the future, and that our programming will not suffer in terms of our partnership with ESPN. You will still see all of our games broadcast on the ESPN platform, whether that be ESPN, ESPN2, ESPNU, or digitally on ESPN3. But we will have to really continue to communicate in a tremendous way to keep our fan bases across all of our institutions informed in reference to staying excited, staying committed to watching and supporting the institutions that are still in the MEAC.
Hey, Coach, I have one follow-up question. I called you Coach, I'm used to calling you Coach. The question for you in terms of the media, in a time like this, and I know you mentioned ESPN and all the other platforms they have, but how important at this time are those of us who have been covering this sport, particularly football, in the Black media? How important are we at this time in terms of carrying out the MEAC message and what's happening with the conference?
Well, from my perspective and the MEAC perspective, you all has always been important. And see, I look at it from a historical perspective, simply because there was a time we didn't have ESPN and all the other sports networks, cable networks, and we depended upon the Black media to promote our institutions and promote Black college football and Black college athletics, period. So I see that as a continuum for athletics programming, that you are just as relevant now as you were then. Not many of you remember Black Mutual Sports Network. You don't remember the Pittsburgh Carry All-American team. So you don't remember BET, who used to broadcast college football, college basketball. Charlie Neal was broadcasting with Lynn Bonney back in the day. So it was important then to brand the kind of athletic teams and coaches that we had, and it's even more important now. And so we just encourage all media, not just a Black media. We're talking all media, mainstream media, continue, because there is value in supporting and reporting on Black colleges and universities.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Now we have Mr. Clayton. Sorry for the delay.
Oh, that's fine. This is Mickey Clayton, Inside Sports. And good morning, Dr. Thomas, Dr. Frederick. We appreciate you doing this and being so transparent. And my question is more along the lines of our student athletes, the students, coaches, fans, with what is going on with COVID-19 and how that, what decisions or thought processes have we made in terms of with it spiking in different parts of the country? What happens if it gets to a point where one or two of the institutions end up having to make some decisions in terms of their student athletes and athletes at their institution or students at their institution and then being able to compete? As we went through the pandemic when it hit last year, when it was basketball tournament time, we had individual presidents that made decisions that took their teams out of participating. What happens with us in the MEAC in terms of that being a board of trustees, board of governors, president, conference? What decision, who makes that decision, and what have we thought about in terms of trying to make plans to the ripple effect it'll have throughout the conference?
Well, Mickey, I want Dr. Frederick to address that question, but I don't think many of you all know that Dr. Frederick is a physician and as president of Howard University. And so Dr. Frederick has been really taking the lead on this across America. He's been on CNN, MSNBC, all the media platforms talking about your very question, Mickey, and we're very fortunate to have Dr. Frederick in our conference with his expertise to talk about this COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Frederick.
Yeah, so Mr. Clayton, it's an excellent question. The first thing is I think we have to look at athletics again in the subset of what we're going to do at our universities. At Howard, I just released our reopening plan yesterday. And if you look at what we're doing there, I also, I'm a big proponent of having an HBCU approach to this because I think we have an unusual and sacred responsibility within the HBCU world. African Americans are disproportionately impacted. Our population is largely African American. And so when we think of bringing students back, faculty and staff, we actually have a different risk level that we have to be thoughtful about. And so with that in mind, next week, Tuesday at 5 p.m., we're putting on a webinar / video conference for all the HBCU presidents and chancellors, in which myself, the dean and president of Morehouse School of Medicine, the president of Meharry, Hildreth, and the president of Charles Drew Carlisle, we are going to lead a discussion around testing and contact solution for all the HBCU campuses. And we've been in some discussions with a couple of proprietors about testing, potentially getting free testing for all HBCUs, and also looking at a potential contact tracing solution that would help. If we're able to do that and coordinate it, that actually is going to help us significantly when it comes to contact tracing for athletics in particular, because we will have central databases whereby our athletes would be part of that. And as they travel from venue to venue and play, we would have the ability to very quickly isolate someone if they tested positive and also be able to contact all of the people that may have played against that particular athlete or use similar facilities, et cetera. So for us, I think it's a very important issue. So next week, we're going to start by having that conversation. And I think, as you know, we're the only HBCU that owns its own hospital. And I think that we have a responsibility to kind of take the lead. And that's why we're going to be out there doing that. And obviously, the goal is to help it impact athletics as well, more broadly, or I should say more specifically, so that we can employ some of those tools.
Okay, thank you for that answer. And if we reach a point where a decision has to be made about maintaining the status quo at our institutions, which will obviously have to have a serious effect on your athletic programs, where does that decision come from?
Yeah, so we'll do a little bit, I think something similar to what we did at the basketball tournament. We were actually meeting when a lot of the news was breaking about the fact that, there were athletes that had tested positive, and NCAA was thinking of shutting down some of the conference tournaments. And as you mentioned, some schools made individual decisions. And I think the one good thing about the MEAC is that we all sat and made a collective decision. And I think that was helpful. It's not lost on me, though, that you've got some institutions that are part of state higher ed set up. So, a Morgan State, for example, is part of the Maryland state system. So while we could get together and have a conference, if the Maryland state system decides that they're going to do something that impacts UMES, Coppin State, and Morgan State, we've got to respect that, and we've got to, anticipate that that's going to happen. I hope that we're going to be able to convince the boards that as a conference, from an athletic point of view, we are taking a holistic approach, and also really a collaborative approach where all of the institutions are weighing in. And you've got healthcare professionals throughout that leading these institutions. The head at Norfolk State has a public health background. UMES's chancellor has a public health background. So I think we are in good stead in terms of being able to make appropriate public decisions based on public health information.
Okay, well, good luck to the MEAC throughout and congratulations on the 50-year anniversary, and good luck coming up.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
We're down to our final two questions. The first one comes from Lute Williams.
I've as two parts. One is real simple, and the other one I just want to ask is, and it kind of piggybacks on what Mickey was asking about the 50th anniversary. Is there anything about the COVID virus and the pandemic, so to speak, that will affect your celebration of the 50th anniversary? And the other question is just, who amongst the presidents is now the chairman of your membership committee?
So I guess I'll jump in. So right now, what we've done is stood up an ad hoc committee. I've asked Dr. Wilson at Morgan State to chair that committee. He currently is chairing that and interacting with collegiate sports. Obviously, I'm staying involved and pretty active with that process. I met with a consultant again last week, and we intend to have a weekly check-in on what's going on. Because of the situation as well, we've been also meeting weekly with the chancellors and presidents and keeping them informed as well. So as much as we have a membership committee, ad hoc committee, we still are doing a lot actively with all of the presidents and chancellors to make sure that we are keeping everybody well informed of where things are and what the next steps are.
Right. Lute, I would like to address the 50th anniversary that you mentioned. Obviously, we're very excited about the MEAC 50th anniversary. Given the COVID-19 pandemic, virtually all of it will be virtual kinds of things in reference to an on-site celebration. Obviously, that's not going to happen this year, given the circumstances. But we have begun to do everything from a virtual standpoint. And so that's the way we will be approaching it for this year. Obviously, we're going to have signage and patches and things of that nature for the 50th anniversary. just for your information, when we're just talking about this pandemic, we don't know what the fall will look like from an athletic standpoint. And
Right.
So we've had some games to be canceled already. And so don't be surprised that there will be other games around the country that are canceled. And we have a forecasting committee that's been working for over 2 months now that will make a report to the presidents and chancellors in terms of if we have to go to an adjusted schedule. And these are the options we should consider if the environment dictates that we cannot have a regular football season. And so the forecast committee of ADs, SWAs have been working on different game plan options for the fall semester and the spring semester as well.
And let me just say, Dr. Frederick, both at the MEAC tournament and even now, you know, your expertise about this has really been helpful in helping us understand what's going on. And this is just the last little part, is that, do you have any forecast in terms of when you think this will be over, or that we'll be in a better situation? Do you see things going better, or?
Yeah, I'd be taking Dr. Fauci's job if I did that, if I had that. And I think even he isn't trying to predict what's going to happen. I will say, you know, a couple of things though that are key for us to all, I think, as a nation watching the next few weeks. One is communication. Is there going to be an improved communication and consistency of the communication? I mean, right now, everything from face masks to gloves and to social distancing and gatherings are, you know, kind of all over the place. And I think that that's problematic for a country that's trying to open up the economy. And we have an economy that's dynamic. It requires travel and people moving around. So you can have that inconsistency from one jurisdiction to another. It impacts, you know, you look at what's happening with New York and Florida now, both have flipped. At one point, you know, Florida's governor didn't want New Yorkers coming to the state. You know, and now the New York governor doesn't want Florida residents coming, you know, to New York. And so we've got to be, I think, a little more consistent based on what's happening at that time. And right now, I think that lack of coordination is probably the biggest thing that concerns me. The second thing is you will have more positive tests as you have more testing. But what we must look at and what we must be, I think, diligent about is what is happening to medical resources. Are hospitalizations going up? And what kinds of hospitalizations? Are you using more ICU beds? So far, the spikes that we've seen outside of Texas and Arizona have not led to that. Florida does have a spike in cases, but their medical resources don't seem to be getting to the point of being overrun. I think we have to keep a close eye on Texas and Arizona. And then younger people are getting it more so, and we have to be clear as well. You don't get herd immunity in a society really until you probably at a threshold, probably close to 60% infected. We're nowhere close to that, right? We're still down in the 2 to 5% range for the entire population being infected. So the only way to stop this right now is to practice social distancing, hygiene with hand washing, and face coverings at this point, and not, you know, having large gatherings where you have infections. And if you don't give the virus a host, it will eventually come to an end. So we've got to be, we've got to really be thoughtful about that, and we've got to really make sure that we can shut that down as quickly as possible. Maurice has also indicated to me that some of you are asking about the panel that we're putting together for the HBCU presidents and stuff next week. And we'd be happy to send you information. It's obviously going to be a private call for HBCU presidents and chancellors, but we'd be happy to push information out, you know, subsequent to the meeting that we have with them about what we're doing there, et cetera. We should have some announcements within a few days after that meeting as well.
Thank you.
Right. Roy Evans, your final question.
Yes, thank you. Again, Roy Evans with the Black College Sports Network. This is actually somewhat of a follow-up to, or and more in-depth into what Dr. Thomas just spoke about. We already saw that Morehouse this morning, Morehouse College has actually canceled all of their fall sports. If we run into a situation where multiple or enough schools decide to cancel their fall sports, is there an option where we could look at playing an amended schedule in the spring with those sports, say maybe just a conference schedule or things of that nature as well?
Well, we've talked about that in terms of in our forecasting committee meetings and nationally with the Commissioners Associations and other ADs as well. I don't think that there is much support for moving spring football fall football to the spring. But I'm not going to say it will not happen simply because April 15th looks much different from May 15th. May 15th looks much different from June 15th. And July 15th is going to look different from, it just, as Dr. Frederick was stating, it's a very fluid and precarious situation. And the dynamic of this pandemic is having a devastating impact on everyone, but to our profession for pro and intercollegiate athletic as well. So you've seen that teams that are reporting to summer school in reference to their workouts and being tested, they're testing positive, which was predicted by the epidemiologists and experts. And as Dr. Frederick indicated, that's going to happen. And they're going to have to be quarantined. And so you are probably going to see games canceled in August simply because of how this pandemic works out. And I think that everyone is hoping that we actually can have a normal football season, whether it be without fans in the stadium or whether it be fans in the stadium that utilize social distancing, as Dr. Frederick indicated. So there have been some options that we have talked about nationally on the collegiate level. But I don't think any firm decisions are going to be made until August, to be very truthful about it. And that's a personal opinion. And so, unfortunately, I don't see moving the fall schedules to the spring. That's another dynamic that's just problematic. You have winter sports, you have spring sports, and then you're gonna push a particular football into that, and then don't forget about the NFL, and so it's just so much that's going on right now, and I think one of the factors for intercollegiate athletics has to do with the cost of testing, the cost of PPEs, the cost of quarantine. All those are financial factors that's going to play upon what an institution can or can't do, and it has to make decisions regarding that.
All right. There are no questions, other questions at this time. I would like to give Dr. Frederick and Dr. Thomas the opportunity if they want to give any closing remarks.
Sure. As I get to know more of you, one of the things that strikes me as important, and especially like the question earlier about the moment that we're in, I do want to mention that I appreciate the support for the MEAC, and I think it's also a representation of a support for HBCUs in general, and the Black athlete in particular as well. So I certainly appreciate that. We're in a difficult moment as a country, and I think as a conference, we're also in a difficult moment. We do feel our conference is strong, but we also recognize that we do have some work to do to make sure that we can strengthen it and make sure that we keep it thriving. For 50 years, it's served us well. And like I said, I think we probably don't shine the light as much on what we do around academics for these student athletes and the opportunities that we give them, which quite honestly is generationally transformative in terms of their own families and their lives, and ultimately what our communities are about. And for us to break down the current ills of what plagues us, we have to multiply that, and we have to make sure that that is strong and effective as we go forward. So I certainly appreciate you guys giving us the time. As we conduct our process, we're going to be transparent. I think anytime that there are challenges, we're going to meet those head on. So I appreciate the commissioners' role in terms of trying to step in and do that. We have been working on quite a few things outside of just membership. We recognize the other factors that we need to look at as well, and we're going to continue to do that, and we're going to continue to try to communicate with you as much as possible. I'll also make myself available to try to answer your questions, etc. I have to get on another call, so pardon me for I'm not being rude, but I'm going to leave before the commissioner's remarks. And again, thanks everybody for taking the time and spending the time with us this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Frederick.
Okay.
I would like to thank Dr. Frederick as well. He has provided excellent leadership during this uncertain times in our society, and particularly from a medical perspective and from a conference perspective. I want to thank all of the media for being on today and asking questions and getting information. We want to be as transparent as possible. We want to answer your questions, and I feel that we've been able to do that. And I think that moving forward, well, obviously the MEAC will have some challenges, but those challenges we feel that we can meet with a great deal of certainty. And we want to make sure that the MEAC student athlete is in a safe environment. And I think that echoes across the intercollegiate landscape. And so these are very, not only difficult, but precarious times. And we're in fluid situations where stuff is changing by the hour, by the day, by the week, by the month. And we're going to have to be able to adjust quickly. And this is our 50th year, as mentioned before. We have just a tremendous legacy in history, from NBA Hall of Famers, to NFL Hall of Famers, all the way to Olympic medalists, from gold, silver, and bronze medal. And so I hope that, and I know that we will continue to produce outstanding student athletes. So again, thank all of you for being on the call, and stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.